Yeah, so this is really the breakout shift, and I've seen I've been allocated 50 minutes with questions, so I'm going to take 2 hours at least. I'll go through this as quickly as I can. I'm going to skip over some of the information that a lot of you probably know. So we're dealing here with another invasive species, as was just mentioned. What's a little bit different about this one than all the others that you've heard of is that this is not just a concern in terms of biodiversity conservation. It's also too close to the speaker. I need to see this though. So it's not just a conservation issue, it's also an issue in terms of gardeners and forestry and also agriculture. This is one of those invasive pests that actually transcends all of these different departments and ways of life. Maybe that way. And basically everybody will have to deal with this beetle at some stage, or most people will have to deal with this beetle at some stage. In that picture there, I see the quality of the screen is not that great. There's a whole lot of these little beetles surrounding one of our beloved oak trees in Stellenbosch. And this is particularly a big problem for oak trees. So this is the guy that we're dealing with. It's a really small beetle, it's minute. It's only 2 millimeters in length, actually it's 1.8 something millimeters, somebody put it out. And one of about 6,000 species worldwide in this sub-family, this group of the weevils. So it's a highly modified weevil, one of many, and they all kind of look very, very similar. So you really do need to be an expert to be able to identify this thing. In many cases you need DNA sequence to be sure, because we also have other species in the same genus that we find in South Africa that are not problematic. It has a very long name, so it's 2 millimeters long. It's called Invasive fornicatus. It has gone through many, many different names throughout its history. Woodford Repentance, and it has been misidentified throughout all the previous literature from California, for instance, and Florida. That's actually a different species they had there in Florida. So the initial signs that you're looking out for is a small little hole on a tree. Really, that hole is less than 1 millimeter in diameter. You can see we use the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen to sort of identify, to indicate that that might be caused by the polyphagous shuttle borer. And these guys usually go for living trees. You don't find them on the dead trees. It is not a bark beetle, so we get a lot of samples, hundreds and hundreds of samples from concerned citizens in the lab, and we often see this sort of thing. See this on. So this sort of thing, where we have these multiple galleries underneath the bark. This is caused by bark beetles. They have these sort of extensive bark beetle galleries under the bark. The difference here is that this beetle goes straight into the soft root of the tree. So that is the sequence of going deeper and deeper into a Africarpus falcatus tree. So there's one of the yellow roots. On the outside, you can just see a little hole, no gum, no nothing. But as you, sorry, I'm going to walk further away. This is the north. And as you dig into the wood, you can see the whole.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Are they supposed to only deal on or go into certain species of trees?
No. So one of the biggest issues with this guy is that it has an extremely wide host range. It can go, in South Africa we've reported that now from 130 different tree species, indigenous, exotic. It won't kill all of them, but some of those species are really very susceptible and don't seem to have a lot of defenses against it. So I'll get to that also in a little bit. So this is the beetle. It goes straight into the tree, drills a hole. With it, it brings in a fungus, and it forms this fungus. And that's its food source. So it actually doesn't eat the tree. It eats a fungus. So it's actually not, the beetle itself is not polyphagous. It only eats one thing. Basically like a Denny's mushroom. And the tree is just the garden in which it grows its food. The beetle itself has a very strange life cycle. So the female beetle will drill a hole into the wood. She can be either mated or not mated. It doesn't make a difference in her ability to reproduce offspring. So when she drills a hole in the tree, the fungus starts to grow around the tunnels. She starts laying eggs, and the larvae will start developing from there. If she's unmated, she will lay eggs that will all turn into males. And then she'll mate with one of the sons, and then reproduce sort of a new colony, a viable colony. If she was mated, then she would lay female and male eggs, or eggs that would turn male and female, and the brothers and sisters would mate. So one of the reasons why this beetle can invade so easily is you only need one female, whether she's mated or not, to establish a colony somewhere in the tree, in the city, in a park, and that can cause a huge outbreak. So there, again, the quality is not great there, but you can see all the different stages. The male, the brother there is sort of half the size of the females. The males can't fly. Their only job is to reproduce inside the tunnels to mate with their sisters. Hence the name for the carcass probably. They have strange eating habits. As I mentioned, it doesn't eat the tree. So this is one of the problems when you're trying to control a beetle like this. It's not actually eating the tree. So you can do whatever you want to the tree. You have to get a lot of chemicals or things into that tree to try and get that beetle into contact with the tree. Only is in contact with that tree for a very short time while it constructs those galleries. In those galleries, it brings this fungus. It's actually associated with 3 different fungi, but its main food source is this Fusarium nivelacea, sort of a nice pink colony. You can bring it onto a growth medium like that. And you see, usually if you open up the bark there, you'll see a little pink streak around the colony as well. That is the fungus growing into the sapwood of the tree. The problem is, the beetle is creating all of these galleries, the fungus is growing into the different vascular tissues there, and it blocks all the transport systems for the tree. The fungus is not particularly bad as a pathogen. You put the fungus in a tree, it won't usually cause the death of the tree. The tree will somehow, over time, beat the fungus. But the combination of the beetle and the fungus, these two together, can be lethal to a tree. So this makes it an ambrosia beetle. It only feeds on ambrosia, or food of the gods, and in this case it's the fungus. And that both together cause this Fusarium dieback disease. So where is it from? It's originally from somewhere in Southeast Asia. So some of the South African population is traced back to a colony or the population in Vietnam. So since then, in 2003, it moved into California. So it's been in California for a while. They've been dealing with this pest for a lot longer than we have. It only really started to become a problem in California in 2012 when there had these massive storms. And all these trees were under severe stress, the branches were broken and things like that. And then the population of this beetle just exploded. After that, it was found in Israel. I think that was 2012. Then we recently, 2017, started here in South Africa, in Roets. It's the first confirmed case. We went back to some sequences that I think there's a bunch of Canadians that came to South Africa. They collected a whole bunch of things and just sequenced everything. In 2012, and there's a sequence of this beetle from Richards Bay in 2012. So this beetle has also been in the country for quite some time. As of last year, it's also been detected in Perth in Australia. So it's not just our borders that are bad, even the Australians are back there. And this has not been published yet, but also in 3 different countries in Europe now, that it's been picked up in various botanical gardens and also some nurseries there. So it's really starting to move around the world quite rapidly. How can you do this? Well, the easiest way to explain all of this is through shipping. If you go to any shipping sort of company, shipping yard, you'll see all of these pallets. These are generally made of very bad wood. This is from Richards Bay, for instance. A plank there in Richards Bay full of holes of something that made a lot of holes in there. There's some live beetles and fungi in that wood. A lot of this beetle, but we suspect also that this is how the beetle got into the country. So really bad quality wood, it's untreated wood that moves around the ships. And we have a lot of these ports where ships can dock in South Africa. So pathways of spread, once it gets to the country, it can fly, but not very far. So the females can fly 1 to 2 kilometers probably. I don't know about the Western Cape, but the southeastern wind equal 2 millimeters big. It will probably cover quite a distance once the wind gets hold of it. But the main sort of culprits are movement through humans, infested with. dry wood, or firewood, dumped wood, or your tree is dying in your garden, you chop down the tree, and somebody takes that to a dumping site, who knows where, or sells that as firewood. Wood chips, and also nursery stock. So anything with a stem diameter more than 2.5 centimeters can host a beetle colony in that stem. So this is one of the big sort of issues when you have to deal with stuff like this. A lot of companies or people, their livelihoods depend on having this sort of bucky and doing garden work and moving things around. You cannot just stop this, because you're going to cause issues for a lot of people. Wood chips, so these beetles can survive on wood chips. Anything that's not chipped, it's chipped larger than 5 centimeters to pieces. The beetles, quite a lot of them can survive in there. The fungus can survive in there also, unless you compost that. So if you compost all of that, raise the temperature to over 50 degrees Celsius, then you kill everything in there. Nursery stock, so this is from a nursery in Sandton. You see the beetle has made a home. Telltale signs of beetle infestation in some of the nursery stock as well. So you buy it in Sandton, you get planted in your garden in Cape Town, and you just need 1 or 2 beetles, and that's all that's needed to start a new colony. Incidentally, this is probably one of the places where you can control the beetle quite easily. It's nice contained in a bag, you can poison the hell out of it in that little bag and get rid of it. So in terms of what we're doing in South Africa, so I'm just going to move sort of that introduction to the beetle itself, just moving to what we're doing in South Africa, but also in the Western Cape in particular in terms of research. So a whole bunch of us got together, basically sort of everybody that knows anything about this beetle got together and wrote a media review on the beetle and in South Africa. So there's a reference for us. Most of what I'm going to say you'll find in that paper as well. Yeah, I don't expect you to see all of those dots there. So the distribution of the beetles currently in South Africa, well, I said currently, that was as of the end of 2020. Pretty much every province except for Limpopo. In some areas, they sort of have a wide infestation, and you find it in urban gardens, in natural forests, in all kinds of settings, agricultural systems as well. You'll see, I don't know where the pointer is on this thing. There. So there's a little blue dot there, so that's the closest known locality to Stellenbosch that we know, which is about 5 kilometers away from us. So it's marching on the way to Stellenbosch, and it might already be here, for all that we know. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 130 plant species that we know that can host either the beetle or the fungus, or both. And 48 of these are reproductive hosts. So these are hosts in which we know the beetle can reproduce en masse, it can make babies. And these are the trees that usually will succumb. So I don't expect you to read that, especially not with this projector, but it includes a massive list of both indigenous and exotic species across a whole lot of families. It does not seem to prefer specific plant families or wood densities or anything. It literally, wherever the fungus can grow, the beetle will be happy. So if the tree can't fight the fungus, then the beetle should be happy. The problem with these sort of host lists that we create is that we put something on that list once we find one individual of that species, that tree host, in which we find beetles breeding. That does not mean that all the individuals of that species can be a host. There's lots of other factors, genetic factors, stress factors, all sorts of other things that influence this. So people look at that host list and they think, oh, we're doomed. Every tree is going to die, which is not the case, I'm glad to say. But in some species, we will probably lose all the trees of that species. In English oaks, we see little to no resistance, for instance, against this. Acer negundo, which is box elder, absolutely zero resistance to those sort of hosts. So some of these tree species, we find absolutely no resistance, and others, there are individuals that have resistance. And also, we do not have a list of non-hosts. We have hosts that the beetle can breed in, we have hosts in which we find the fungus of the beetle at least once, and then we don't have a list of things that they cannot breed in. And the reason for that is, and we take California as an example here, they had a list factor, And they were sued when people planted some of those trees, and it turned out that the beetle actually started breeding in some of those. So we don't have money as scientists, so we're not going to sort of open ourselves up for that sort of thing. I think the easiest way to find out if a beetle will kill a tree or not is to look what's in that immediate surroundings that are not touched by the beetle, and work from there. There is problems with evolutionary sort of consequences of the beetle and the hosts. So the beetle can evolve to take on new hosts over time, for instance. But that's a sort of current, it's a good way of looking at it. Initial symptoms are also really difficult to define. Each tree individual fights off pests and diseases in its own way. So it's really difficult to say, well, if you see this thing on a tree, it is PSHP. There's just a couple of different symptoms there. It's not very clear on there, but it can just be a small little hole, 1 millimeter, no other symptoms, like we see in yellowish, for instance. Little patches, if you open it up, you can usually see the fungus growing around that tunnel. So the fungus grows into the sapwood there, it concentrates all the nutrients for the beetle around the tunnel, it sporulates there, and the beetle and its larvae have their food. Little wet patch there, you can have these like an avocado, you see these sugar fountains, so that's just gum that has a lot of sugar in it. Gum, or just these sort of frass, these noodles that are pushed out of the tree while the beetles are digging. And if you wait too long, you'll see the trees will start dying. So just some examples of what it can do. So a lot of people in Stellenbosch have not seen what this beetle can actually do. So there's a picture of a street in Sandton in January 2018. No living trees there. I think these were all box elders. If you look at the stumps, so a whole lot of these trees have been removed. You can see the telltale signs of the PSHP there. So in the stumps there, you can see the tunneling there. You can get the fungus out of that, and the beetle still living happily in those stumps. So you know it was PSHP. That is the exact same street with Google Earth 2013. So in a very short time, all of those trees have been killed. Way before they actually knew about the beetle, they didn't know what was killing the trees. They sort of thought the beetle was something that comes in afterwards when the trees are stressed. March 17, this is from Google Earth. This, again, between Sandton there, that's the same tree. So this 4 years, that photo you see up there. Same tree 2 years later. So mass attack on this tree, they can do their thing really rapidly if there's a lot of breeding hosts around, of which plane trees are one. The trouble is plane trees take a long time to die. Even when they look like this, that tree is still alive. It is basically a mess. It looks like it's been shot with a shotgun. The beetles are breeding in their millions coming out of that tree. The tree is still alive, just sort of hanging on. But it's declining slowly. A little bit closer to home, this is George. So this was 2 years ago. So this is just a couple of trees driving around. These are all oak trees. So those brown leaves and things that you see there, this is in the height of summer. That should all be green, fully sort of clothed in their leaves. Just a couple of trees in George. These are all gone now. They've all been removed. There's a few trees standing. They're all dead or dying. I think the entire George, we know of 2 trees that seem to have a little bit of resistance. 2 English oak trees. All of the other ones, literally over 1,000 trees, have been killed since 2014. So if you look at the branches there, riddled with the sort of the gummies of the beetles. So this is what killed the tree. It's just a mess. There's no way of transport of fluids and anything in these trees. And the initial problem here, again in George and that area, was people didn't know what was killing this. So the municipality chopped the trees down, left the wood there. It's oak wood. A lot of people like the oak wood. The municipality said, well, take it if you want. So people took the wood and they took it basically everywhere. We know that the first sort of incidents of the beetle in Somerset West started. Of course, people did landscaping and they brought in wood from George without knowing that that was infested. That sort of whole garden setup was made around an Essendon window tree, which is one of the main food sources for this beetle. So they literally had to get out of the stump, got into their main food source, and a huge population explosion could happen. So it's really looking bad in George, in Leisner. We would like to see now what happens after all of these trees die, all of these reproductive rates, will the populations crash or not? All kinds of things there. So these signs are everywhere before we were falling branches of things. This costs municipalities millions. You can't leave those trees up there. The branches fall down, the wind, it's a hazard to people and property. So these have to be removed at an average cost of about 7,000 rand a tree. Some are much more expensive. It's next to a building, for instance, it goes up to 40,000. It really is a big issue. And then the snake vendor type of things that are happening everywhere in South Africa now. Everybody has a cure for this, just like COVID. This is the ivermectin version of PSHB care. So people are pumping all kinds of things into trees. This is a little bit like farting against the wind. I mean, that's a little drop of fluid that you put into that, and acid tree is not going to do anything. In any case, even if it was a really good pesticide. And people are making lots of money out of this. So Stellenbosch, this is a typical scene in Stellenbosch on the farms there. Everything above the roof height here is a reproductive host for the beetle and can disappear in the next 5 years or 10 years, whenever this beetle is here and has done its thing. Oak trees in Somerset West, the first one started out about 3 years after they've been infested. And about 5 years now, if you don't remove those trees, they start to die. So between 3 and 5 years for an oak tree, from when it first gets the beetle to when it's dead. Ace in the window is 1 year, 1 season, growing season is enough for that to die. So some of the studies we did, so we're looking at sort of natural forests, the Chicago, Leisner, those areas. So we know that the beetle is in George, Wilderness, we found it in Sagefield, Leisner, Plett, Nature Valley now, so recently confirmed, basically that entire system has now been invaded by the beetle, and we can actually monitor the beetle as it's starting to move into the native forest. There's 51 permanent monitoring plots there, so we will monitor this for the next 20, 30 years or for how long we can. The biggest sort of thing that we saw there is movement with people, how people can move this thing around quite far distances. This is a yellow tree at a picnic site right in the middle of the forest. The beetle is nowhere near that area in general. But this tree, you see some of the wood there, some briarwood was brought in, there's a large fireplace there. The beetle was in that, and they started climbing into the trees there. They started a new colony there. And a breeding colony. This is the first tree that we actually found that you could see that this beetle can breed in yellowwood trees, which up till then we didn't know it was possible. So, movement of wood, especially to natural areas, should be stopped at any cost. So, sort of buy it being bright, or those sort of slogans won't work in this case. That wood is probably from George, where there's a lot of the beetle, but we're moving it a few kilometers into the sort of native forest, the steep forest. The easy solution to this, use charcoal in these areas. It's not a nice solution, I also like a fire, but if you want to be sure, there is an alternative. Some results from those 51 monitoring plots, these are just sort of preliminary results. Things that makes a site vulnerable, except for people moving this around, these are very common sense actually, but we sort of needed the stats to show this. If you're close to the infestation border, so the town of George, where there's a lot of the beetle, the chances that a site will have the beetle is very, very high. So the closer that beetle gets to Stellenbosch, the higher the chance that we can get it. Breeding host abundance, obviously. The more breeding hosts there are, the more chances for the beetle to find food and to breed. What makes an individual tree more vulnerable than its neighbor? Diameter of breast height comes up in a lot of our analysis. These beetles have the ability somehow to choose, and this is not by chance, bigger trees. They go for the bigger trees first. In terms of Stellenbosch, we have a lot of big oak trees here. They'll probably go for them first. Again, breeding host abundance, so there's a lot of food, they can do their thing, but also the infested host abundance. So the number of trees around that tree that has infested trees, your chances of getting it is higher. It's like COVID. If 5 of us have it, then all of us will get it. If one had it, then most did not have it. And this is one of the reasons why we advocate for removing highly infested reproductive host trees as soon as possible. We want to bring the propagating pressure, the number of beetles down, so they can't reach high numbers in a fast time. So this is, I'm not going to go into detail here again, but looking at the chances of trees, do they choose a specific tree, host tree, or do they go at random? Just by looking at the distances, they travel to infest a tree, and on average they skip a couple of perfectly good hosts to go infest a specific tree, and that's usually the larger tree in that area. So they choose these bigger trees. So what does all of this mean? The closer you are to infested area, the more likely it is that you'll get SHB, which makes monitoring extremely important. The more breeding hosts you have, the more likely SHB will invade. Easy to find food, I mentioned that also. High propagable pressures, the more infested hosts you have, the higher the chances of infestations, but also severe infestations. And while I was going through this is in native forest, so I haven't looked at urban areas and this sort of stats, but this comes to mind. Stellenbosch, we have all these criteria for this beetle. It might already be here. So where is it currently? So that was 2019, basically almost in the 2-block radius. You could pinpoint where the beetle were invaded at that time. That was that same year. You know, when this sort of garden got this beetle in there, and to trace where this beetle was. So that's 2019. That was 2020, much wider, sort of spread with the prevailing winds mostly. So they do use the wind to spread. Last year, the entire Stellenbosch West basically is now invaded by this beetle. This is despite considerable effort from Cape Town municipality to eradicate some of the highly infested host trees. It literally just can't keep up. This beetle spreads exceptionally fast. And then sort of went over the Helderbergs area, and currently that's the closest known locality from last year. It's about 70 kilometers, 5 to 7 kilometers down on the R44. It might be much closer by now. This is 6 months later. It's literally using the R44 and the trees that we plant next to the R44 as a highway to get here. So in 2022, this year, it might reach us. Next year, it might reach us. The thing is, it's going to reach Stellenbosch. And then the next question always is, well, so how much will this cost? So we've teamed up with some economists. They know much more about working with money than I do. And all kinds of models in which you can sort of see what will happen in the next 10 years. I'm also not going to go into much detail. This is currently under review, so these numbers might change. But these numbers are enormous. So this is in the next 10 years. So this is based on international dollars, millions of international dollars for South Africa. So there's a low baseline, so that is sort of if we get things wrong, and it's going to be much less than we think it is. We still see, I mean, that's billions of rands. The baseline, this is sort of what we expect based on what we see in California and other places happening. And it's in some of the counties here. And then the high scenario, if something goes wrong, and we really wrong, it just does way more than we did. So if you look at the total numbers here, that number there equates to almost 1% of the GDP of the country. That's a lot of money on one invasive species. And most of that is going to be felt in the urban areas. Citizens and municipalities, they are going to feel it. These trees are going to die. They're going to need to be removed. They're going to need to be replaced. You can't just leave a hole there. So in terms of Stellenbosch, we have a PhD, part of a PhD looking at this. We're using some satellite imagery to try and sort of plot. We're looking at only the deciduous trees, because most of the trees that you expect to die will be the species that are deciduous. So this is sort of ignoring a lot of other trees that might also die. We get to about 28% of the cover of Stellenbosch. The whole municipal area of Stellenbosch is covered in hosts that are deciduous, and of that, about 80% are these highly susceptible hosts. Preliminary results, this will be refined over time, but that is a lot of trees. Roughly the same size as Somerset West. Actually, there's a lot more trees here than in Somerset West. So currently, the Faircon is spending about 3 million a year just for monitoring and removing trees. That's not enough. They're losing the battle quite quickly, quite rapidly. This is without replanting of these trees. So we've got some estimates on if they had to replant just the trees that they've taken out by now, that's about 1,000 trees, of a size that will survive. It's about 4 million rand just for the replanting of this. You can't just plant a tree and leave it into water and all of those things. And this is, all of that is without all the other sort of ecological benefits and things that we get from the trees. This is just monitoring that. So in Stellenbosch, I've seen some of the budget things that they've brought down. Some of that budget is going to have to be allocated to this. So with all of this, time is always of the essence. So previously, the methods to identify the beetle, you get a sample, either of the beetle or the tree. It needs to be a fresh sample that we can get DNA out of the beetle. If you don't have the beetle, you have to take the tree, grow the fungus out of that tree on specific media, and that takes about a couple of weeks. Extract the DNA and sequence that to ensure that we have the right organism there. And we can do that because this fungus is only associated with the beetle and vice versa. They don't swap. They're highly dependent on each other. So that takes about 2 weeks. Then the MSA students sort of came up with a plan by looking for a specific DNA molecule that's specifically this fungus and nothing else, that we can directly sequence, look at the DNA directly from a wood sample without growing anything. So we don't need to grow the fungus and extract the DNA and all of that. We can take a piece of wood, put that in a PCR tube, and sequence that, and within 1 to 2 days we can have an answer, a yes or a no, or a maybe, or whatever. And that's going to cost substantially less as well. So currently we spend about 3,000 rand minimum per week, or just identifying these samples that are coming to us. That's going to reduce it to less than 200 rand a week for that information. So we live in Stellenbosch, we're sort of surrounded by vineyards and all kinds of fruit trees. So what about these? So the student has looked at some of the grapevine and some of the fruit trees here, just by looking at the fungus first. So remember, if the fungus does well, it's highly likely that the beetle will also do well. So we're using the fungus here. Grapevine, our wine industry seems to be fine, thank goodness. We have tested only on 2 cultivars, but after about 3 months the fungus is dead. The vine gets rid of it. Apple, pear and all stone fruit that we've tested, the fungus goes really well, and especially stone fruit, it does exceptionally well. So this is some of the tests here, and the beetle we found breeding in apple, in some of the stone fruit, like in almond as well, and what's the other one? The peaches, and there's another one, plums. All in garden settings though. So these trees in gardens are more stressed than you expect them to be in the plantations. There's also lots of chemicals and things being sprayed in the plantations. So whether this is translated to any troubles we see in the actual commercial side, we don't know. It might be that whatever they're spraying currently will work to get rid of the beetle. All of these tests that we did on the fungi, though, were done in production orchards. So the fungus side of things will also regularly apply. And despite that, the fungus did really well. So hopefully, if you can get rid of the beetle, then you don't have that issue. So fruit might get a bit more expensive, and in the north, arrows especially can be very hard hit. There's a PhD looking specifically at sort of what's happening in the urban areas in Somerset West. There's 3 of the chapters there looking at the epidemiology of the beetle, sort of when it flies, when it's breeding season, when are they most active, and all of these things translate into when the specific control actions can be taken. Using propiconazole and benzoate for management. So these are the 2 chemicals that stand out from trials in California. They've been doing this for a couple of years now. So these 2 chemicals show the most promise and doing that by ejecting the trees. You don't want to spray a massive tree and spray is going everywhere and all kinds of other effects. And then also trying to figure out why the beetles choose specific trees. not just on size, but what makes specific trees more vulnerable than others. Is it tree stress? Is it too much nutrients? A whole bunch of those sort of things. So this is one of the experimental sites. Calculating all those green things on monitoring tracks. So there's about 50 up. We've got some sort of I don't know what to call these, right? So we've got all of these traps, monitoring traps, the green ones up, and those are cleaned every 2 weeks. This has now been done since 2019, when the beetle was still there. In 2019, we started monitoring. The beetle was not on that property at all, so they saw it was coming because it was really close to them, and they started this monitoring plan really, really early. And about 6 months or 8 months into the project, we found the first couple of beetles in these traps. 2 years later, now, every 2 weeks you go back, out of those 30 traps, there's more than 1,000 beetles guaranteed in those things. These things are mass producing. The really horrifying thing there is that the beetle's not breeding in a single tree on that property yet. It's in a few trees already, but the sort of mass trapping seems to have collected a whole bunch of the beetles in that area. All of those beetles are coming from outside that property and flying into the property. So this is just what the monitoring trap looks. It's really basic little trap there. We've got a lure there, considerable, and a preservative at the bottom there, and in that little trap, some traps, in the neighbouring farm, we found more than 2,000 kilo individual trap. Remember. So that thing could be pitch black with all the beetles that we catch there. So some of the initial findings, so this is still ongoing, none of the data has been analysed, but what you can see there is that the PSHB activity is very strongly temperature related. It starts in late winter in South Africa and peaks around about now, sort of late summer into February. The numbers really do pick up. As I mentioned, you can get thousands of them per month in a month. From the oak trees and things that we've been monitoring, since the beetles go into the tree for the first time the progeny comes out of that tree is about 2 years later. Other trees, like aces, is much sooner, within a month, the first progeny will start to emerge. The issue also with a lot of sort of claims that people make of things that work is when some people go into the tree, within a couple of months, the tree seals behind the tunnels of the tree. So they go through the canyon of the tree sort of closes that wound. The beetles are very happy inside that tree. They're doing their thing without any sort of sign on the outside. To you, it looks like, oh, I beat the beetle. There's no activity, there's no gum, there's no nothing. I won. And then wait a year or two later, and then suddenly these things start emerging en masse out of these trees. And then we also saw that mass trapping reduced these attacks, attacking with them substantially. We have 2 neighbouring areas there that opted out of this sort of mass trapping trial that we did. And that was quite nice because we had these 2 control areas, and they are currently cutting down hundreds of trees on properties surrounding us. So it does definitely reduce the property pressure. We've just started with some of these sort of looking at tree stress and how that influences the fungal growth and the beetle sort of population numbers and things like that. So I'll report on that next time we meet. Chemical management. So we tried to look at whether the chemicals, this propiconazole and emamectin benzoate, can they be used to prevent attacks or also as a remedy after beetle attacks. We know that once a tree is heavily infested, there's nothing you can do. From the Californian example. So once there's a lot of beetles in that tree, there's pretty much nothing you can do. That tree will not survive. We also know that this is not a silver bullet. Chemical treatment, it has, so you can try and minimize all of the sort of impacts it has surrounding that tree. But these trees are reliant, all of them are reliant on microbes in the soil and other sort of symbiotic organisms. If you put in a fungicide that's sort of not specific for a specific organism, you kill everything. All the root-associated fungi you kill, and that tree starts to suffer immediately. Also, you are making little holes in this tree that can get infested by other things if you're not careful. So in terms of what's happening, for instance, in Europe with the Dutch elm disease they had there, that wiped out all the Dutch elms. They use chemical treatment, they can extend the life of that tree for say 10 years, and they use that time to plant other trees to sort of catch up in the canopy of that specific tree. So that when the time comes, they chop that tree down, there is something in its place already. We don't have that. So, yeah, it's not a long-term solution, it can be a very short-term solution, it can help. Well, we're testing now in a month or so, it really does help. But it's labor intensive. There's all the injections, that's a fungicide and insecticide, so you're targeting the food and the beetle. It's systemic, so this is sort of taken up in the tree. This is a small tree, and you have to have these injectors pretty much every 8 centimeters apart on these trees. Otherwise, you miss parts of that tree. The vessels go up and down in this tree, and you'll miss large areas of that tree, and the beetles will survive. And we don't know how long this is effective in that tree. We're also using this currently just on wind pollinated plants to reduce impact on bees and things like that. But yeah, there will be some other sort of impacts on the non-specific impacts. Now the MSc, we're going to look at, is going to start this year looking at other chemical treatments, also some of the more natural control treatments that one or two of these things might work. Sort of biological control things that you can have. We started looking at that. According to literature, I don't see much of this actually working, such as the bacteria, bacillus solutions and things like that. It works on small trees and small plants, herbs, massive trees, 3-meter diameter, sort of stem chances are very, very low. Doing much more monitoring to find out what's going on, but also looking at the control options, sort of when to cut a tree down. And from current evidence, it's quite obvious that winter is the best time to control. If you want to chop a tree down and prevent beetles from flying around everywhere, it's winter, when it's cold, when they're not active. In summer, you chop that tree down, just the actual action, the vibration of the tree chases a lot of these beetles out already. Which is not a problem for that site, but also you don't want to move that problem somewhere else. This is a bit more technical, but we're also looking at the genomics of the beetle and the fungus. From that, you can trace the movement of the beetles at a very, very fine scale. You can look for actual specific chemical markers that you can target with specific biological control agents or chemical agents to control these organisms. So this is in collaboration with colleagues in Germany. So they have the money and the expertise. We have the problem. So one of the very first things we saw there is, this is the tree of all the sort of fingerprinted PSHB genotypes out there. All the genetic variants of this beetle that we know around the world, Vietnam, China, US, wherever. So these are South African guys sitting up here, that's the original one there, and all of these things surrounding it are basically from China, and then also the US is the same genetic makeup. And we thought we had one genetic variant here in South Africa, which meant it was pretty much clonal, everything that we saw in South Africa. And then when we started, we saw, oops, there's another one in South Africa, close to Durban, which is their harbours, is spread now to the George area as well. It's not as common as the first one, but what this does show us is two things. There's now chances for genetic recombination of the beetles. Now they can actually evolve and take on other food sources that they previously might not have been able to. And also that this beetle has not arrived in the country just once. This is a continuous problem that we're going to have over many, many years. This beetle might arrive, different genetic forms, taking different hosts and different abilities, coming in constantly into the country. And then also I was looking at the sort of thermal performance and physiology of the beetle. So the more that you know about organisms, the more you can use it against them. So just looking at temperature and movement, for instance. So once we'll set up a machine there, which you have a platform, you have a beetle in a petri dish there, the happy beetle. You put it onto a stage, it's sort of a temperature stage that changes the temperature according to what you set it as. You record the temperature, you have a camera set up, and you record the movement of the beetle, and then you have the software that actually sort of analyzes the data for you. So basically you see how much the beetle moves, or does whatever at different temperatures. And a couple of surprises there for us. So this is the average speed, so how fast they move, and this is how quickly or how much distance they travel. So this is just also preliminary stuff. I think this was only done with 30 or 40 beetles. We'd like to up that with 120 beetles at least. That's the temperature range. We tested from 8 degrees, anything below 8 degrees they don't move. So if it's cold, they won't fly. Chop a tree down, when it's cold, they'll stay put. They can't move. And also not at the distance. But that's a very short range, between 8 and 13 degrees Celsius, where they can actually move and do their thing. And in the Cape, temperatures don't often go below 30, especially closer to the coast. We have a peak at around 23, 24 degrees Celsius, nice and comfortable. But the surprise thing is you see also a lot of activity after 38 degrees Celsius. So we stopped the experiments there. We don't know where the thermal limit is on the other side. And if you look at this range, it pretty much means that the entire South Africa is foraging habitat for this beetle. So other questions are, how can a beetle travel on its own? Does the host influence this? So if you eat an oak tree, it will fly further than you eat something that you're not happy with. And can weather influence that? And just, that's kind of a large study. So these were all just sort of Western Cape studies happening. There's a lot of things happening through this sort of network in South Africa, this research network. Picking up trees, we thought was safe. We were just about to publish that it was safe. And then lo and behold, we got an orchard 2 kilometers from back, and picking up trees are not safe. And what was different between those two is the exact same cultivar, it's just the way that they cultivated the 2 trees. In the one sort of area, they topped the trees, lots of sort of sun and air movement in the sort of lower canopy. In the other one, they didn't top the trees were growing as normal. And the branches at the bottom started getting the beetle in, the numbers build up, and then they move into the rest of the tree. So something as simple as that can have a huge influence on that. Looking at satellite imagery, also predicting the impact of Gauteng. We're looking at that, population genetics of the fungus in South Africa and the world. We have other Invasive species in South Africa. There's at least one more invasive species that we know of. And we suspect that that species is not a problem usually where it grows in the world, but it's picked up the fungus from PSHP. And it's starting to go into trees. So a lot of our reports, we say not a lot of them, but for the coral trees especially, we thought it was PSHP. It's a genetically almost identical to, or morphologically almost identical to PSHP, but it's not PSHP. It's a different beetle that goes into those trees. Biological control options, we're looking at that, so there's a PhD starting to look at that. First in South Africa because of COVID, and we'd like to go to Vietnam and have a look there. But in South Africa, we found a few closer to it was what we thought were. We got them identified, and only one is a candidate. The other two actually use the little holes as breeding grounds for themselves, so they don't have anything else to do with the beetle. And all kinds of mites and things there. So that's the only way that we think that you can actually bring the numbers down to manageable levels. A chemical control, you can't go and spray chemicals in a forest, for instance. In gardens and things, limited you can, but that tree must be worth a lot to you because it's going to be expensive. You can have to take it once a year. Looking at what to do with the wood after you chop the tree down, what works, what doesn't. Solarization works really well, so you have your heap of wood there, either chipped or just some pieces of logs. Put that in a dark plastic and make sure to keep it like that for 2 months. The beetle and the fungus should be dead on sunny days, sunny months. And then looking like sort of similar to what we did in the garden route areas, looking at the impact in natural forest in KZN. It's a little bit different there. The tree dies, nobody notices, because 3 days later there's the whole tree almost back in its spot. But you change the entire community. The biological community changes considerably after that. Yeah, so lots and lots of things happening. Some pictures there. Lots of people involved. There's about 8 universities and institutions involved in all of this research. And hopefully one day I'll be able to give you some good news.
Thank you, Francois. I think for people hearing this for the first time, it must sound like some script from a horror movie from Hollywood. Luckily, we in the horticultural industry have been aware of this since 2019. where we've been well briefed on it, and I can tell you that a lot of work has been done, and the macadamia nut growers and the avocado farmers are really, really worried about this in the north. It's a really real big problem. So, okay, we've got these very pertinent questions. Okay, let's start with Debbie. We've got the mic right with you.
I try to start off with, DFV should be under your acknowledgements.
They should, yes. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And then another one with regards to your chemical, just to acknowledge to everybody, you cannot do trials without approval from Act 36.
Well,
Act 36. No herbicide trials by anybody without an Act 36 approval, firstly. And then secondly, the two, I've spoken to Teresa, don't worry, but I just want to let everybody know here. Ivermectin benzoic is not a stem inject pesticide. You can't actually stem inject ivermectin benzoic. It's a foliar application, or it does not work as a stem inject. Propiconazole does, but ivermectin benzoic doesn't. So, unfortunately, that's not the nanometer work.
yeah, so we're following some of the work that was done in California as well, where they looked at either one sort of separate and together. And ivermectin benzoate, I don't know, it's probably limited uptake from injectors, less so than foliar applications. So some of it must be taken up because it is effective in some instances.
It's got a 20% uptake.
Yeah, the foliar uptake.
A 20% uptake of the stem inject, yes. so it's not economically viable.
Yeah, okay. So the reason why we did that, of course, is we don't want to go and spray trees with all sorts of things.
Yeah. So my suggestion to Trudy was propiconazole. Thanks.
Great. While we're waiting for the next speaker, what we really need to do is train these little buggers to go for the alien invasive plants. I mean, don't we have a training program for these folks, honestly?
So they do, just to answer, so they do go for quite a lot of the invasives, black wattle, acacia saligna, and they breed in them. The problem there is that they choose the bigger trees first, and by then the problem is much worse in any case. So then you don't have just the acacia meningia problem, now you have the acacia meningia and PSHE problem all in one.
Hans, you have a question?
So I'll speak just as a citizen now. I'm your fellow scientist, but now I'm sitting in Stellenbosch. This thing is 7 kilometers away. Apart from becoming an alcoholic, I mean, what are we supposed to do now? Are we supposed to, and what do we go home, and what is there practically to do now, or do we await new results, or what are we supposed to do?
Well, so if I had my sort of way, I would say clear the 3-kilometer radius of all the reproductive hosts around Stellenbosch, all those kinds of things in the rivers, get rid of all of that. And monitor as soon as it gets into the tree and it's starting to pick up numbers, remove the tree. So there's this sort of lag phase before an invasive becomes really a big problem.
But you're saying you remove all the trees now, is that what you're saying?
I would have, but there's no money for that. So all the oak trees and things that invaded.
We're going to remove all the trees in our homeowners association.
No, surrounding Stellenbosch. But yeah, so the prognosis is not great, I think. It's on the way. I would say this is a warning, but I don't have a solution. These oak trees are suffering in Stellenbosch already. They don't need much to push them over the brink, and I think once this thing is here, we're going to lose a lot of trees, and we have to start thinking of what we're going to do, what we're going to plant in their place, because saving them will likely not be an option.
We got the mic. There we go.
Hi, Leon Fisser from Trees Unlimited. This is such a critical issue. I'm disappointed that this was left till the last talk. I think that this hall should be full of the people that we had at the beginning of the talk. So this is critical. It's such I know that a lot of you here don't know about this thing, but it needs a lot more publicity, if I can put it like that. So your talk, Francois, it's important for you to get this out and need a lot more information.
I can just mention one of the problems from the horticultural side is we are concerned that it has not yet been listed as a 1A or 1B invasive. And there's obviously been problems from a bureaucratic point of view that it has not yet been listed. And that's why it's not getting the attention that it should be, in my opinion, as somebody from the horticultural industry.
Yeah, I've got two questions. Obviously it's here. What's the chances of them moving on the west coast upwards? And what are the chances for olive trees, olive orchards? Are they trees that, is the way?
So in terms of moving up the west coast, so that will depend on which hosts they will go for. So currently, Vito is the only host that I know they can breed in that will find on the west coast, for instance. So the dry area is kind of a lot of breeding material. No guarantee, of course, that it won't move, but I think it'll slow down at least, because most of the most susceptible hosts that we know of, you probably won't get there. But then again, there's a lot of things that they've never been in contact with, and we don't know if they will go for it or not. And they do love Chrysoprus as well. They do breed Chrysoprus, and maybe Chrysoprus is Chrysoprus, they'll be able to move throughout the landscape quite rapidly. Second question regarding the olives. So we do see them going for olives, generally not bad at all. So we haven't seen them reproduce in olive trees in gardens. So they will try their luck. I think they try their luck with anything. Literally all those that they get in South Africa, except for the aces, are foreign to them. They've never encountered this before, so they literally try almost anything. So they do try olives, but I've not seen a single olive tree where the beetle can breed in that's anything that seems that is not going to make it.
There we go. Luckily, the West Coast don't have too many new trees. Here we go.
Prof, good evening, actually, good afternoon, Jacques here. Can I make two comments and then one question? Prof, we were on site, I think in 2019 when we first got those aces in a cul-de-sac in Somerset West. Strange enough, the lady, the homeowner, wanted us to look into the garden and we couldn't find any traces of the beetle. We walked back now, and about 5-6 houses down the line, the recently purchased house was the very first English oak we found. So it's interesting to maybe try and find out how that oak is doing. That is in Somerset West. Debbie, our colleagues in George have had good results, if I can say, with unregistered products, trying to say that the big oak in the old actually came. So, I think that will make for some interesting debates and discussions in George.
I don't know if it's top down.
I said mixed results, as we got into that. Prof, so the question is there a correlation between the actual wood? Is somebody doing a PhD on hardwood, softwood, like a Suffolk versus specific trees? I know you don't have a definitive list of host trees, and I know that list changes weekly, but is there a list of preferred, almost resilient trees that we could potentially plant, landscaping commercially and in residential properties? Thank you.
Sure, that's a lot of questions at the end there. So in terms of, we've looked at wood densities of all the hosts and the sort of genetic, phylogenetics, the sort of how closely related the different hosts are to each other, and there's no signal for any of them. So whether the wood is very dense or not very dense, whether the bark is very thick or not thick at all, that really doesn't matter to them. Or what family it is. Certain families, they won't go for it, it seems. The problem is that, like you said, we don't have a complete list. They haven't had a chance to get into contact with anything yet. And they change or evolve over time. In terms of lists, I can tell you what not to plant. So if you said, give me a list, I can tick off no, 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 no. I can't say yes, yes, yes. The others are all maybes. It's as far as I can go with those things. But as I mentioned, I think the easiest thing to do would be go to Somerset West, where the beetle's been up for 3 years. A lot of the trees have died and been taken out, and you can see which host they go for and which they leave alone completely, and I'll take my chances with those.
Right. One more question.
Yeah.
Right, to your right.
Francois, I've got a few questions. One obviously is habitat-specific requirements. In other words, what habitat would they go for? That's where the question, I suppose, with dryness also came in up the west coast, because it would be more generalized. Then the next one is about a coppicing species, whether that would survive. We know that stinkwood, for instance, survives phytophthora for a period if you chop it and let it regrow. Then the third one, which hasn't been answered, I couldn't hear the answer, is obviously it's good for alien removal in some instances, but what about fynbos? You haven't mentioned anything. There are trees in fynbos or whatever. Have you looked at them? Is there any movement in that direction of the beetle? And then, of course, are the other sap-sucking insects also transmitting fungus?
Okay, so what was the first question again? Oh, the habitat sort of requirements. So, quite frankly, at this stage, it doesn't seem like there's any specific habitat. As soon as if that habitat has hosts in which it can reproduce and the temperatures fall within the 12 to 30, 38 whatever degree range, they can be found there. On the map, if you can see, there's a lot of action around the coast, of course, and that's where all the harbours are, and a lot of people are concentrated, and Gauteng and everything like that. But they also occur in Mediterranean type of habitats in Europe now, in Israel, Hawaii, California, very close sister species you find in the tropics. So the actual physiological requirements don't seem to be sort of keeping them in check. Also in Mexico, so I forgot, Mexico, close related species has invaded Mexico as well. So it's sort of into these desert areas there as well. Prosopis and those things. So and if you look at the habitat classification system for South Africa around the world, there's really not much except for the Arctic sort of areas where they won't invade. Then you asked about the coppicing as well. So yeah, so when is a tree really dead? I mean, you can have this big tree and it dies, but they do coppice. We see that with the what do you call it, African wildpeach, Kigularia. So once the beetles start attacking the tree, they start coppicing, and the tree might die, but the tree is actually not dead. We have all this coppicing things, and those side branches are too small for the beetle to breathe in. So you might end up at a stage where once those branches reach a certain stage again, they will become susceptible again for that beetle. So in the end, you'll sort of prune these trees to these sort of shrubs, like is what's happening in what's that valley, Tiguan Valley, somewhere close to California, where all the native Salix species, wolfers, I don't know what that is in English. Yeah. Willows, that's right. All the willow trees have been basically taken out, all the big ones, they're coppiced and they're sort of coming back now, but as soon as they reach a certain stem diameter, the beetles go for them again. And also all kinds of other invasive things coming into that population. Yeah, and we've seen that also with poplar trees. So these silverleaf poplars, like we have next to the Easter River, the tree can die, but it starts coppicing again, at root coppicing, and it actually seems to exacerbate the problem of the invasiveness of that particular tree.
Francois, we are right in saying that a lot of work is being done internationally on this problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of California,
it's not just Francois, there are a lot of guys.
The question about the fynbos, so we have seen them in a couple of fynbos riparian systems, yes. So in riparian systems, some of the native willow trees they can kill. What's this thing called? I don't know all the trees. I had to learn tree names very, very quickly. There's a couple of trees, sorry. In the sort of riparian systems that we know are very susceptible. Ilex vitis, for instance, very susceptible, they die quite rapidly. Fynbos, we've seen them going for proteas and things like that. I don't think that's a problem. We haven't seen them breeding in it. I also think that the fire cycle and the scale of fires in the fynbos will keep their numbers in check. I don't see them killing proteas within the sort of fire cycle. We haven't seen that in George and those areas at all. George Botanical Garden, with the fynbos there, not so much. Very much around the forest edge trees, Virgilias are highly susceptible. These sort of buffers around the forests, those trees are dying quite rapidly. But fynbos specific, not so much.
There you go. Okay, one last question at the back.
Good afternoon, Francois, and thank you very much for such an extensive presentation. My question is a number of questions, but I'll just bring two. First of all, it's been a while since we had citizen detectives. I think 5 or 6 years, if I'm not correct. And tell me, has there been any new locations where it's been found recently? First, and then the second one, you mentioned that in George, it's in a natural area or a forest. And have you tested whether how fast does it spread, or to which pace does it move, or does it spread particularly? Have you looked at that? Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of the sort of where it is, let's just see if I can go back to that map. So that's kind of, how do I minimize this? That's where we know it is currently. There's a parcel now. That's the wrong one. I know it's not very clear. So, anytime now? Okay, well. Must I press something else? Okay, there's some other presentation mode thing here. So, well, basically, so I don't know when you say recently, how recent. So I think after 2019, after Somerset West, I think it's after that that it was detected in Grahamstown. And then also in Victoria Zoo. So they brought in a whole lot of food for the koalas and things in Victoria Zoo, plant material, and the beetle got there. And so the Victoria campus, the university campus, the beetle is also now on campus for the first time. They've detected that now. And other areas, I can't think of any other areas, they started to spread, slowly but surely. But not that I'm aware of, that there's actually sort of jump dispersal events that I'm aware of at this stage. And then, what is the second question again?
So the other one is the range in which it spreads.
Yeah, so the range is a difficult one also again. So for Somerset West we have the data, so there's the fastest we've seen is about 6 kilometers in a year that is spread across from sort of a point of introduction in Somerset West. And the numbers have boomed, sort of exploded. And each time it's consecutive years, so about 6 kilometers, 2 years in a row that it's been able to do that we know of. In the forest, natural forest, it's a bit more difficult. It's difficult to move through forests. So we have these permanent monitoring plots around at various distances from these fronts. And this is the very early stages of invasion in these forests. So really most of the impact we see on the forest edges or just sort of inward of that. The isolated things that we see in the middle of the forest, for instance, that's always around fireplaces where people can camp and things like that. So moving through the forest seems to be very slow. It's hampered by probably masses and masses of trees around there, lots of food. So if there's a lot of trees around you, you won't disperse far to find your food. You'll rather stick around where there's a lot of food. But the rate of that, we can't say. We've been only working there now for 2 years, and we haven't actually seen uninfested plots deeper in getting infested over time yet. Hopefully never. We actually hope that once that probable pressure, once all the trees have died in George and all these breeding goes die, that pressure is going to be released into the forest, and that the forest, the natural systems can sort of fight and take over. There must be some natural enemies in this forest hiding there that can help contain the spread of it.
Great. Francois, thank you so much. I think they've quite a valid point. For those people who haven't heard about the shotholed aurora, it sounds devastating to say the least. But let's hope natural cycles. And the important thing is that we do know is that somewhere in the world where this little guy comes from, there is something that controls its natural predation. So let's hope we can once again find the balance, because that's what alien invasive species control is all about, is it not?